Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Star Wars: A New Hope. This came out in 1977. It was directed by George Lucas. Every once in a while I like to go back and review something that was heavily influential in my life. Like last year I did Lord of the Rings, and so, now I figured it was time to tackle Star Wars, something that is kind of the elephant in the room, I suppose. And I've talked about Star Wars certainly, but it's not something that I bring up a lot, my relationship with it. But, I am as cliche as it comes. I'm just like any other child that was my age back in the 90s. Star Wars is the reason for all of this. The reason that I am doing reviews. Obviously there are other factors that contributed, but when it comes to movies, this is the gateway drug, or it's one of the main ones, top of the list. I don't know why, I don't know how, but just my heart went aflutter the first time that I saw Star Wars. And I don't know if people are surprised by that. I don't know if people think, yeah, that's typical. I really don't know, just because of the types of movies that I do review on here and what I typically gravitate towards. But it's just a huge part of the fabric of my life. It was huge when it came to my formative years. And I guess because of that, and the same could be said about Lord of the Rings, if you watch my reviews for those, I think I got, a little bit burnt out on it once I, hit the adult years. As an adult, just my priorities and my interests start to change, and I can still have an appreciation for the childhood, but yeah, my interests just lie in a different area. And I do look at Star Wars more as a kid's movie, and I often wonder how I would respond to the film had I never seen it as a child. But watching it again, it's perfectly suited for children. Yeah, revisiting it was weird as shit. Because it had just been so long. It had been a really, really long time since I had seen the original film. And like I said, I'm trying to be as objective as possible on it. But how can you be with a franchise this gigantic? Really, what is a bigger franchise than Star Wars? There's before Star Wars, there's after Star Wars. That's just how it goes. And there are very few films that do that, I think, to that degree. So you just don't see movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, movies with that kind of ambition and that kind of psychedelic feel to it, made on that scale really ever again. And it's ironic too, but I certainly don't blame Star Wars. It was never anybody's intent to completely change the formula of movie making. And that is part of what is interesting about watching this film, is the innocence of it, just having no idea what was about to come and just looking at it as an initial concept. It often feels miraculous. It's very hard to be able to tell what is going to touch a nerve with the public and what is not. And, this movie was such an independent venture, and it was so rebellious for the time, which seems so counterintuitive now when you just look at how things have shaped. But it obviously became a fucking Frankenstein monster. A mega franchise commodity, a phenomenon. It is immortalized in ways that I never thought possible. And, I don't need to tell all of you that. You know that. And maybe that's part of why I didn't review it as well, because it's like, what can you say about a movie like this that's been talked about, so much? But yeah, I don't know. I've just been really interested lately in what was the initial thing. It's like, what caught people's attention, what caught people's imagination initially and got that momentum going. Because the very basic thing, I think, is very different than what it eventually became, even though, aesthetically and everything, it tries to remain true to the roots, but it really did morph and mutate into something very, very different. Something naturally that the creator has no control over. It dresses the part of Star Wars, but it doesn't really feel like Star Wars in the heart. And it's fragmented in so many different directions, as is the formula for, corporatized entertainment these days. But yeah, it's surreal and it's deeply personal to go back and watch. But, it's also very bittersweet, just knowing again that this is kind of the death of a certain type of movie, of the cerebral film when it comes to grand scale. But I am trying to imagine, it's like, what would this be like if it was 1977? I feel like you could really feel that risk factor and recognize just how original the packaging of this was for the time, of course, just capitalizing on a moment, because it was a very independent thing. And it was made by a rebellious film school brat. That generation of artists led the way in Hollywood for that period. And when it comes to the auteur conversation, I don't look at George Lucas in the same way that I do like Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola. But he is very interesting and very versatile in a way, or was very versatile in terms of, his interests. His previous works, THX 1138, that's a sci-fi film, and then you have American Graffiti, which is obviously very different as well. And then comes Star Wars, but all of them do feel like passion projects. And I think with Star Wars, he just really gets it. And obviously that zeitgeist feeling in American Graffiti, all of that, I don't know, it just kind of reverberates here. We do see that in his career, just a childlike vigor, something that I think he shares with his buddy Steven Spielberg. And like I said, it's just repackaging something at the right time, using a model like Flash Gordon, the kind of serialized sort of look. And aesthetically, it's just really sharp in that way, really understands all of that. It feels very tasteful to me. And when I think of the way that nostalgia is typically captured, particularly like that, this could have so easily been so different. It could have been so dated. And yes, I know that it is dated by design. That's supposed to be part of the point of it. It's nostalgic, but at the same time, it feels elevated. It feels fresh and new. I think the best movies like this are the ones that, yes, they capture an old feeling, and yet they feel new at the same time. So when you can bridge the gap there, I think you've done it. Yeah, I mean, just watching the first few minutes is very surreal for sure, but it's rousing, it's grand, but it's also very silly. It is light fare that doesn't feel like it's meant to be taken seriously, and yet people take it so seriously, and it's just very interesting, especially like the way people talk about it in the media, the way it is immortalized, as I've said, to such extremes as we've noticed in maybe the last 10 years. But again, it's also very moving at the same time, and I can't be too hypocritical because I was certainly a cult follower for Star Wars for many, many years. Because there is something that is special about this one in particular, just because it's really the only innocent one. It's the only one where there isn't that kind of expectation. Their expectation was just get the thing made, good God. All of it, of course, is before too much power was gained, because I look at those original films and then eventually the prequels, of course, and that whole experience is just kind of like the emperor has no clothes situation, where a creator becomes so famous and is told he's a genius so many times, surrounds himself with only yes men, and the result is what we have. And for Hollywood in my lifetime, I look at that as just a really interesting train wreck. But then obviously when Disney buys it out, it's as if they reference George Lucas as if he died or something in passing. It's very chilling, and I think a lot of it is kind of the antithesis of what Star Wars initially was, something that was a chance, taking a chance on something. And like I said, A New Hope has very little pretension to it. I really appreciate the balance of it, because I keep thinking to myself, in the hands of another filmmaker, in the 1970s, in a pitch meeting in the mid-70s where you're like, I want to make a movie that's in space, it's a space opera, it's going to have, like weird creatures, and I want like classic serialized Flash Gordon influence and all of that. It could have been so incredibly goofy and very, disco. I don't know, I just picture like groovy Xanadu, late 1970s cult movies. I really think this movie could have gone in that direction, but no, it really had a sense of conviction and respect. And I don't know, like I said, it really keeps the elements buzzing around, but it never leans too heavily in one direction. It's very clean. And most importantly, it's told very classically, very simply told, and the script is really, just from a structural standpoint, it's near perfect. It's really hard to criticize it in that sense. I always tell people, if you want to write a script, you start by taking a movie like Star Wars or Wizard of Oz or The Matrix, honestly, something like that, one of those, and just pull it apart and diagram the scenes, figure it out. It's the best way. The reason that we always use those as reference points is because they are perfectly structured when it comes to very basic hero's journey. With all of those movies, everything really serves a function. There's almost no fat to trim at all, and everything just kind of adds up and makes sense. And honestly, I think that is a huge part of why it feels so accessible and why, it's resonated for so many generations, absolutely. And not passed around in that cult sort of way like a Jodorowsky film or a David Lynch film. Those filmmakers are amazing, but I do think, sometimes you can be a little bit too obscure, a little bit too eccentric, that you can't maybe tackle something like this. And I think that George Lucas has enough of that control where he can really rein in all of those elements and again, package them really in a way that people notice and it makes money. We're not looking at a Dune situation, though I know a different situation that is, and I do love the original Dune, all respect to it. The world building, of course, in Star Wars is a huge part of it, and obviously it's very successful here, though this film does feel smaller in ambition in comparison to the later installments, and that's certainly part of the point. It gives you somewhere to go. But there's something about it where I'm not quite bridging that gap between my childhood and my adult life, where it's really singing and it's really resonating with me in an emotional way. It does feel a little bit thin, a little bit slight, and that's just, again, a personal taste thing, because There are, like I said, a lot of different things from my childhood that I return to. And I love them even more, maybe as an adult. And I think a lot of that is because the things I gravitate towards are a little bit wild and wacky, and Star Wars is not wild and wacky. I look at movies like Fantasia that are so dark and twisted and really take you into scary psychedelic places. I look at even Wizard of Oz, like I mentioned before, and even though the formula is what it is, there's this really interesting idea about illusions and breaking those illusions, and then, all that kind of stuff. And yes, like I said, Star Wars, great for my childhood. Then I get older and I'm more interested in stuff like Star Trek. And, when it comes to George Lucas as a filmmaker, there's just something that's lacking for me. I don't know, there's a lack of sex in his work for sure. And, that's fine, but there's also a lack of physicality to it as well. And all of that is by design. I prefer, that it gets a little bit more grotesque and all of that. There's more texture to a movie like Empire Strikes Back. And I think that's part of why I'm maybe more drawn to like Indiana Jones, which is very similar. And obviously he wrote that. And obviously that's made by Spielberg, somebody who, there's no libido in those movies whatsoever, I would say. But, there is a sense of physicality with Indiana Jones. You squirm, you're scared, there's blood, there's creepy, crawly creatures, eyes melting out of people's sockets. It's just fun and gnarly. And I guess I just tend to gravitate more towards that. And honestly, when I pop in maybe the soundtracks, like the soundtrack to A New Hope as an example, I feel as though it's more visceral. I can relive the experience of the film perfectly through it in a way that's more enjoyable than watching it. Part of it is just because the external elements of Star Wars are so strong. And, music being a big part of it. I know all the soundtracks to Star Wars like the back of my hand. And those elements just beef it up in a way, when you listen to the soundtrack, it is everything for Star Wars. And I'll almost go so far as to say, I don't know if I should say this, but it almost feels like John Williams or Star Wars, I don't think it deserved somebody as good as John Williams, but I'm really, really, really glad that it does have John Williams. It feels like the right decisions were made and the right things were left on the cutting room floor initially. Obviously, when it comes to the special editions and stuff, I'm not even going to get into that. But yeah, just like aesthetically, obviously, these are all things that are just so a part of our culture. Just the aesthetic, the sound design, it's all just enough. Like I said, it never goes overboard. And a lot of these elements are exactly the same in every single movie for decades at this point. Honestly, it's like every opening of Star Wars is exactly the same. It's like, who would dare to change it? It works for a reason. And like when I think back to the first time I saw Star Wars, so many things pop up in my mind as things I'll never forget. The first time I saw a lightsaber, the first time I heard that sound, and I was like, that is the coolest thing I have ever seen, and probably one of the coolest things I will ever see. And I still feel that way. The film does a really good job of building the tension, and part of it is the time. And so naturally the pacing is going to be a little bit different, but I miss that a lot. I miss the calm. I miss the silence. I miss how long it took for us to understand a world and get to know the characters before the big climax. And that's here. It really, of course, starts to rev up once we get to the Death Star, but it all feels very satisfying. Though the third act, I don't know if I'm really, really crazy about it. I think in some ways it sticks the landing and in other ways it doesn't. The Battle of Yavin is interesting. It's chilling in some ways. Naturally, when you think of the context of everything, you just watching it, just watching the cutting and the sound and just the dialogue and everything, it's like, you can see like every decision being made by a video game creator, an action filmmaker, a computer animator for like the next decades, the next 30 years. It's all just like flashing before your eyes in this really weird way. So overall, I do like the movement and the design of the sequence, and I like the tension of delaying the music for several minutes and then it kicking in at a specific point. All of that really, really works, and that is very Star Wars. Miniatures look great. The movement is great. The dialogue and everything, you feel that action-adventure spirit, absolutely. Star Wars is known for those types of sequences, and this is just, kind of more of a rudimentary version, and it would grow. But it is chillingly modern in feel, and I think it hits all the beats for sure. So yeah, there's a lot that I appreciate for sure with perspective. There's certain things that just don't quite click for me. And maybe that is because I need to go and watch Empire Strikes Back again, because that one I think did all those things that I'm craving for sure, and it did it properly. It had a starting point and it really decided to take a different step. And I think, like the stuff with Yoda, I think that's some of the best stuff in Star Wars with Yoga and the Dagobah system. I love that kind of dream sequence duel. I think that's probably the most deep that Star Wars ever got. And I do think it is the most ambitious and cinematic of the original three, because, then we have Return of the Jedi, and it's kind of like Muppets in space. But every one of those films does have something in it that is very solid, some more than others. But I think overall, it's one of the strongest trilogies out there. And like I said, this one might be one of the most clean, one of the most balanced. And there are so many individual elements in it that work, and that set it all in motion in a really, really interesting way. And it can be quite depressing to me, and I can really dismiss it quite easily compared to, I think, a lot of people. But, I always have to remember the foundation. Like, I always need to remember just how important it was for me. It meant a lot to me at the time, and it meant a lot to a lot of people, still means a lot to a ton of people. And, that's really cool. It's just, it is weird to view all that through the lens of a critic. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support. And welcome to all the new members I've received. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.